Okay, well, good evening to general public and to staff and to fellow commissioners for our planning commission meeting of April 11th, 2022. I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement and then move into roll call. The land that Eureka rests on is known as, in the Wiyot language, as Jarujiji. Past actions by local, state, and federal governments removed the Wiyot and other indigenous peoples from the land that threatened to destroy their cultural practices. The city of Eureka acknowledges that the Wiyot community, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. This acknowledgement demonstrates the city's commitment to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. Commissioner Lazar, do you mind leading us in salute to the flag? Thank you. Now we'll move forward into oral communications. And this is a part of the meeting where commissioners...
Mr. Vice Chair, excuse me. Could we do a roll call, please?
Oh, yes, please.
Right over me. Sorry about that. Commissioner Lazar?
Present.
Commissioner Benson?
Present.
Commissioner Kraft?
Present.
And Commissioner Mayer and Commissioner Freitas are absent.
All right, and my understanding is that means that we have a quorum. If we are in full agreement, things can be passed, but otherwise they won't. Okay, thank you. All right, so then moving on into oral communications, this is where commissioners and the public have an opportunity to address the commission on any topic that's not in tonight's agenda. Is there anyone from the public who would like to, either online or in person, who would like to address the commission on any item not in tonight's agenda? You might have to unmute yourself if you're online to speak. I'm not seeing any hands. And I'm not seeing anyone from the public wishing to address it. Any commissioners? Okay. Well, then let's move right into Section D, public hearings. And there are no continued public hearings. And it appears that the Humboldt QOZ Fund Coastal Development Permit, conditional use permit, and design review has been postponed or renoticed for a future meeting. Do we know, Principal Planner Getz, when that might be?
It might be a special meeting, or
Okay.
it will be the May meeting.
Okay, so either a special meeting or the main meeting, and likely the next one or some ahead of that?
No, it would be the May meeting.
Okay, great, thank you. So we'll move right into the appeal of the Norse commercial remodel and addition at 2710 Broadway. We'll be able to hear a staff report on that tonight?
Yes, you will.
Okay, so I would like to turn it over to Planner Castellano to give us a report. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, well, good evening, commissioners. Caitlin Castellano, going to be presenting this appeal to you tonight. Today's hearing, let me move my, so I can see all your faces. Today's hearing is regarding two appeals of the director's February 25th conditional approval of coastal development permit number CDP-21-0010 to remodel and expand an existing single-story commercial building on Broadway. The project site is located on the west side of Broadway and is surrounded by Broadway to the east, In-N-Out to the north, a parking lot to the west associated with Carrington Company's multi-tenant commercial development behind In-N-Out, and a vacant commercial structure to the south that was previously home to Mr. Fish Seafood. The project approved by the director includes adding 1,062 square feet of floor area to the existing building and increasing the number of commercial tenants from 1 to 2. The project also includes new landscape planters, 12 parking spaces, an accessible path of travel for pedestrians at the front of the building with a ramp up to the existing sidewalk, and a bicycle hitch for short-term bike parking. The project approved by the director also includes new facades for the exterior of the building. Here we see how the east side of the building facing Broadway will look with the improvements and how it looks now. The project is in the CS Service Commercial Zone District, and it is located within a developed strip of commercial properties, also zoned CS, that run along the western side of Broadway in southern Eureka. The project site is located in the coastal zone, and a coastal development permit is required. The project was approved by the Acting Director of Development Services on February 25th, 2022 with 10 conditions, and 2 appeals of the approval were filed within the 10-day appeal period. 1 appeal was filed by Colin Fisk on behalf of the Coalition of Responsible Transportation Priorities and Humboldt Baykeeper, contesting the city's decision not to include conditions of approval requiring Caltrans's recommendations for improvements to the driveway onto Broadway located north of the property and the sidewalk along Broadway fronting the property. City staff's reasoning for not including the recommendations as conditions is included on pages 7 and 10 of the staff report. Most importantly, the standard of review for coastal development permits is consistency with the local coastal program. And the local coastal program does not include any policies or standards directly related to sidewalk and driveway improvements. But the local coastal program does include policies for ensuring public access to the shoreline. And there is already a new ADA compliant sidewalk from the store to the Vigo Street Trail entrance, ensuring public access to the shoreline. Oops, sorry, I forgot this little picture. The project will also have a positive impact on this access to the shoreline by adding a landscape planter strip along the western perimeter of the sidewalk, and by adding windows to the building facade facing the sidewalk, both of which will improve the pedestrian experience. Also, staff does not believe it is feasible for the applicant to make any improvements to the driveway because the driveway is owned by 2 commercial owners to the north, that's In-N-Out and the Carrington Company. And based on a conversation with one of these owners, it is not likely they would give consent to the improvements. For these reasons, staff believes the project as designed with the existing sidewalk and driveway improvements is consistent with the policies of the local coastal program. So the second appeal was filed by the owners of the property directly to the south of the project site, the Mr. Fish Seafood site, alleging stormwater drainage from Broadway and the adjoining property was not adequately addressed. Stormwater on the property currently flows to the northwest, and the approved project will add 748 square feet of landscape area, and all rainwater falling on the roof will be directed into the proposed landscaping, improving on-site retention of stormwater runoff. Condition 6 of director's approval requires the applicant to install stormwater management features consistent with the city's Phase 2 MS4 stormwater permit and with required inspection by Public Works Engineering. For these reasons, staff believes the project as condition adequately addresses stormwater management consistent with the policies of the local coastal program. And then I'll just briefly show you about the Mr. Fish site. It does include 2 driveways that allow runoff to enter the property from the highway. The applicant contends that some of the highway runoff coming onto their property is currently able to drain onto the project site across the paved area in front of the existing Discount Cigarettes building. The proposed expansion of the building towards the highway and installation of landscaping between the sidewalk and the expanded building may prevent this runoff from flowing onto the project site in the future. While this may be the case, the project is not responsible for the highway runoff that is draining onto the Mr. Fish parcel. So overall, staff believes that the project as approved and conditioned by the director is consistent with the city's certified local coastal program and will be a positive for the city as a whole by improving an existing development along an established commercial corridor. As a result, staff recommends the Planning Commission hold a public hearing and adopt a resolution sustaining the director's conditional approval. So here's a suggested motion. Myself and Principal Planner Getz are available for questions, as well as the applicant's agent, Devin, Medred, who is on the Zoom call with us. And I will stop screen sharing and can pull this up later during discussion. Thank you.
Okay, well, before we move into public comment on this, I just want to see if any of the commissioners have some immediate questions before we hear from the public.
I do have one question. It's on the second appellate about obstructing their signage or the possibility of signage, and I just wondered what staff's analysis is on that.
I can't hear it all, just letting you know.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank
Apologies. It used to be the other button. So the second appellant had a point in their appeals about blocking their plans for future signage. And I wondered what staff's analysis is on that. It was really the only part of this thing that I did not understand. So I'd love to have some more clarity on that.
Yeah, it's my understanding that existing signage was actually removed by Caltrans. So there is no signage there right now. And also in the future, the city does allow buildings to be built to the lot lines because there's a 0 setback in the CS zone district. So there aren't really, there are some existing regulations about how far apart some existing pole signs can be, but there are no regulations preventing, like I said, a new structure if it was built to the lot lines up to the maximum height. They could do that. The zoning code allows that. And if Kristen has anything to add, please do.
All right. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have one question about the stormwater. I understood the direction from the figure that you showed to the northwest, and also heard your comment that the new planter will allow, has the infiltration capacity to take the roof runoff, but really no comments about any runoff that might come off of paved areas, to the, I guess that would be the southeast. Has there been any staff analysis of the capacity of that planter relative to receiving stormwater from the sidewalk area, or in fact, does any stormwater move that way?
Yeah, the flow of the site is to the north, west. Thank you. No. The way the stormwater is flowing, it's flowing away from the Mr. Fish parcel and towards the in and out. Right. And so whatever water that falls on the project site that's not on the roof or in a landscape planter would naturally flow away from the former Mr. Fish building and property, and would actually flow into the existing drainage inlets that are associated with the in and out in the Carrington Code.
Okay, Commissioner Lazar, any immediate questions?
I do have a question. So, Caitlin, the right-of-way width, I'd like to get you to confirm the actual width of the right-of-way. Looking at the assessor parcel map for it, the flag of the Carrington property, at least in one incarnation of the parcel configuration, shows as 12.5 feet. That wasn't clear on the site plan included in the staff report, and I'd like to know exactly how wide that right-of-way is, the one that's the shared right-of-way for this project and the Carrington parcel.
Yeah, so it's 12.5 feet for the southern. So the right of way is essentially split up in between two parcels. The northern part associated with in and out is 12.5 feet wide, and then the southern part is 12.5 feet wide. Associated with the Carrington Company, kind of looks like a flag lot, if you will say, but it's two separate parcels that comprise the 25-foot driveway easement.
Right, and one of those parcels is the project parcel, no?
No, they're
Okay.
both not on the project parcel.
So one is the in and out parcel and one is the Carrington property.
Correct.
Now, I paced it out today, and I got 38 steps. So if it's 1-to-1 for my feet, the width of the existing driveway, as I measured it, was over 25 feet. And so I'm interested in why, considering narrowing it to actually 25 feet, since the right-of-way itself is only that big, is not on the table right now.
Yeah, it's my understanding that Caltrans just wanted it to be narrowed to make sure to force people to do a right turn only.
Well, I
And-
understand that, but it seems feasible. So in the staff report, there was discussion and in the presentation that they would need permission from the property owners, but really the property owners only control 25 feet of the actual width, right? Based on the easement as you described it.
The property owners for the project only have an easement over the driveway, so they don't own anything, and they don't own any part of the driveway easement. And the property owners of the driveway easement said that they would not allow any of the improvements.
Improvements
that is
being
why
the,
it's-
the narrowing of the driveway to match the easement width.
Correct. I mean, when the property owners were talked to about the potential of it being narrowed, they indicated no, they would not allow any improvements on their property for this project, associated with this project.
Okay. Well, all right. I'm going to leave that alone for now. The other item, let me just see here. Wanted to confirm the development standards that apply. You mentioned in your staff report there was no setbacks applicable in this zoning district. Additionally, it sounded like the height limit for this area was a 50-foot height limit. Is that correct? Or 55 feet?
I believe so.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. There are no landscaping requirements under the code that apply in this area. Are there landscaping requirements that apply elsewhere within the city?
Yes, but not in the CS zone. So there are certain requirements that if you're within a certain amount of feet of like a residential district or the CW district, they would, but not here.
Okay. And then I guess I would ask, maybe Kristen can speak to this about the sidewalk standards. It's my understanding there is a standard for this area, though it's often outside of the city's control because it's within the right of way of the highway. But can you speak to that, Kristen?
That's correct. There is all of the streets within the city limits have a certain width to them, and part of that includes a sidewalk right-of-way area anytime there is a sidewalk. The right-of-way area generally is between either 4 feet and 12 feet in width, generally on both sides of the street. Oftentimes, either side of the street doesn't match the other. Sometimes there is for example, a 12-foot right-of-way, but the concrete part of the sidewalk is only 6 feet wide. So if a property owner were to try and locate their property line, what we advise them to do is from the face of the curb, measure back 12 feet or whatever the sidewalk right-of-way width is. That's approximately where your property line is. In this particular area on Broadway, the sidewalk right-of-way area is 10 feet. But just like the County of Humboldt does not have to comply with the rules and regulations set forth by the Eureka City Council or in our zoning code, Caltrans does not have to apply with our regulations either.
In this case, the area of the Highway 101 right-of-way that's intended for sidewalk, or at least is a 10-foot area on this side of Broadway. Is that correct?
According to our maps, yes.
Okay, thanks. I wanted to confirm, it sounds like in one of the exhibits, the wetland that was associated with the development of the Carrington property, it showed as not being developed, but in the satellite imagery, it appeared that it has actually been developed. Is that correct? The mitigation area?
I believe so.
Okay. And I want to confirm that the applicant is proposing to relocate the electrical panels and the gas meter to the rear of the building. That seemed to be evident in the staff report.
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay, that's all I have for now.
Excuse me, Steve?
If someone from the public would like to speak?
Oh, I think that's the applicant's agent.
Okay.
Yeah, this
Mr.
is
Chairman.
Devin.
Mr. Chairman,
I was trying to just.
we need to open the public hearing before we take comment from other speakers, please.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate your desire to speak on behalf of the applicant. I'd like to just have you hold that for a minute until the commissioners finish asking questions of staff, and then I'll open it up to the public, and then everyone will have a chance. Appreciate your patience. Thank you. I think there's maybe a few more questions out there, but we look forward to hearing your clarifications. I guess I have another question. Just looking at the baykeeper's requests that the city honors some of Caltrans' recommendation. I get that we don't have to, but it's not a must. It's a may situation. I'm wondering if the right turn directional arrow was put in the egress lane and the no left turn signal was also put in there, or is going to be part of this project, or are we dismissing the need for that signage in this particular proposal?
Yeah, staff's recommendation is to not require those as conditions of approval, but if you were to not uphold the director's decision and require those as conditions of approval, I would ask that Kristen Getz elaborate on what would happen if the property owners did in fact not allow those improvements to happen, and how would that affect the current coastal development permit?
Yes, I would like to hear that from Principal Planner Getz, what the ramifications of not doing that might be, and how the landowners might respond.
So if the Planning Commission were to place a condition of approval on the project that said that they had to install those either the modifications to the right-of-way or the signage that was mentioned in Caltrans comments, and because the project property owner does not have control over that driveway area, nor do they have control over the signage or the turning movements from that driveway, if the Planning Commission placed that condition on it and the applicant was unable to convince the owners of the driveway to allow them to make those changes, the current project would not be able to move forward without modification by the Planning Commission of that condition.
Mm-hmm. And is it always the applicant's responsibility to install signage that's related to public safety, or does the city also do that for applicants for certain projects as well?
I don't believe that the city installs signage on private property.
Very good. Thank you. That's helpful. Okay, let's open it up to the public now. I'd like to go to the person who first started, and you can speak now, sir. And are we holding this person to 3 minutes like the rest of? They're the applicants. They might provide clarifications to the application.
That's up to the commission.
I see. Good. Well, let's keep the 3 minutes going for now, and we can ask additional questions if needed. Thank you. Go ahead, sir. Yeah, Devin, would you still like to speak to the commission?
I don't believe that was Devin. I believe it was a call in, and they're now muted. If you can hear me and can unmute.
I can hear you.
Caller whose number ends in 8741, did you want to speak?
Okay, not hearing. Maybe he'll call in again or unmute at a later time. Let's hear from the general public who are present.
Excuse me?
The caller is now unmuted.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay, you have your 3 minutes now, sir, and then we'll get back to public who is here. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. So I just wanted to discuss the electrical and gas meters. Originally, I moved them to the back because currently they're installed on the front southeast corner, and I think the gas meter is installed behind the building towards Mr. Fish. But now that we're going to be kind of installing a basin or proposing a water basin at the west end of the building, I'm going to probably propose having an alcove at the southeast portion of the building where the electrical and gas meters would be installed. It's not included on the plans right now, but I just wanted to let Steve kind of have clarification on that question earlier.
I guess I would just through the chair because we're talking about something that isn't before us right now as far as a design change. Caitlin, do you want to speak to that as far as how we treat that if we were to approve the project tonight? Need to identify that the site plan is going to be modified to reflect the change in the utility configuration. And I'll just be honest, the reason I asked, sir, is because one of the reasons for staff's recommendation for the to not apply the requirements of Caltrans was that it would involve messing with utilities that lie in from the existing sidewalk. And so if you're already proposing to move metering associated with the building, it seemed to me to open the question as to why that wouldn't be feasible to also address the utilities that might need to be relocated as part of any sidewalk expansion. So I don't know we need to get to the bottom of that quite yet, but I appreciate you responding to the question.
Okay.
Okay, we'll move it back to people who are in the chambers with us. And then we'll go back to alternate between online folk and in-person folk. So Colin, you're on deck.
Hi,
Welcome.
I'm Mary Ann McCulloch. Sorry, getting over the crud. We own the Mr. Fish property. My husband's owned it for 50 years. I've only been around for 47 and a half. Anyway, I do have a question through the chair for what Devin just said about a water trough. That might kind of, I'm not sure if that has any application to what our appeal was. Because currently the water, years ago, they cut the berm to allow the water flow through because it would go under both properties, in between the properties. And if that's not addressed, it's not only going to hurt the Mr. Fish property by the water sitting there, it also will hurt Mr. Noiseye's property because the water is going to continually just go to his property and just sit there. So when he said something about a water trough, I'm not sure exactly what he meant, but I would assume that Mr. Norzai wouldn't want water standing up against his building, no matter what the situation. So we were hoping there could be some sort of a drainage system put in between the two, whether it's a French drain or something like that might help mitigate the standing water. That would be helpful. So, like I said, our property is probably not going to stay the building that it is. So, as it sits, it doesn't necessarily make a difference, but it would definitely make a difference to Mr. Noiseye's because the water's going to butt up right against his property. So, like I said, the berm was cut years ago by the former property owner of the cigarette store, as if it wasn't the cigarette store at the time, because the water was butting up against his building. So Caitlin is right. It doesn't really necessarily affect us as much as it affects them, but it is something that benefits both properties. So thank you.
Thank you for bringing that forward. Let's move back to online. Do I see Colin Fisk with his hand up?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. Colin Fisk, I'm the Executive Director of CRTP, the Coalition for Responsible Transportation Priorities. We have over 600 members and supporters, many of them here in Eureka, and we're one of the appellants in the case. I only have 3 minutes here, so I'll just stick to some of the highlights. The crux of it is that Caltrans recommended some pretty simple best practice sidewalk and driveway safety improvements, and the city declined to require them, and we think that it was wrong. Staff have argued that the recommended sidewalk improvements would be inappropriate, partly because of the city's failure to require similar improvements in the past for adjacent parcels or other recent projects. But frankly, mistakes of the past don't justify mistakes of the present. The staff report also says, and you heard, that there's an adopted policy of, I think, 9 or 10 foot sidewalks in this part of Broadway, which is basically mirrors the recommendation from Caltrans. But again, that requirement was dismissed. And I think that that was largely because of the failure of adjacent parcels to meet that standard, which I don't think is a good reason. Additionally, the staff report doesn't really provide any arguments against the recommendation to move the landscape strip to the other side of the sidewalk, where it can provide a buffer from traffic. And even in the absence of sidewalk widening, that I think would be a significant improvement to the pedestrian environment. Perhaps most critically, Caltrans also recommended narrowing the driveway and adding the no left turn sign. Those are pretty simple, but would result in a notable safety improvement by reducing the exposure of people walking and biking to moving vehicles and reducing the likelihood of drivers making dangerous rapid accelerations into traffic. The city, as you heard, dismissed those requests because the driveway is not owned by the applicant. And while the ownership situation presents complications, frankly, that's not the city's problem. If the project is relying on the driveway for access, there is no excuse for not imposing basic safety conditions. Finally, I want to address the argument in the staff report that a comprehensive corridor-wide approach to safety is preferable to addressing it on a project-by-project basis. And we completely agree with that, and we're working along with the city and Caltrans to make sure this happens as soon as it possibly can. But the unfortunate truth is that corridor-wide improvements take time, and we're in a crisis situation. The mayor and the city council have said as much, and the city has adopted a Vision Zero policy committing to reducing deaths and serious injuries to zero. And in that context, we have to take every opportunity, no matter how small, to improve safety on our dangerous corridors like Broadway right now without waiting. And in that context, again, the Director of Development Services' failure to adopt some of these basic recommended safety conditions is an error which we're asking you to rectify. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fisk. Other people interested in speaking from the general public who are present here today?
Jennifer Coult has her hand up online.
Okay, let me hear from a person who's just stepped up to the mic here, and then Jennifer Coult, you'll be on deck.
Hello. Hello. I'm Mark McCulloch. I own the former Mr. Fish. This water issue became a very large problem for me in '96. We had a hell of a rainstorm, and it came down the motel's driveway, and it was a flood clear across the road. And that's when we had to cut that berm. It flooded my store, which I've never seen like that before. Approximately a week later, the same thing happened. There was water in my store from it. And so when we cut the berm, that released it. Which I think that's a big point to address. Another thing that I was going to come up here and speak first about was the setback. I realized that the city, or Caltrans, whatever, changed the setback requirements. It used to be 30 feet for obvious reasons. I think that 30 foot is a major problem with safety as far as that being that close to the highway. Look at what used to be the restaurant south of me, which is now a Mexican restaurant. They had the big fountain built there in front of it. And that was as a buffer from the highway. Now it's down, of course, but that being a good example of traffic coming by there gonna plow into that building. A truck or something like that would just. And also my sign that was taken down recently by Caltrans and their widening sidewalk situation. Now I have to deal with my sign in a different way, which I have not done lately, because this came up all of a sudden at the last minute. Now I got to figure out what to do about a sign. I'm not really too hot on the whole thing, as you can imagine, for several different reasons. So that's my thought. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir. Thank you. Jen Coult, this is your time to speak.
Good evening, commissioners. I'm Jennifer Coult, director of Humboldt Baykeeper and one of the appellants. I would like to echo everything that Colin Fisk said, but I would like to also add the fact that we're really concerned about this due to the coastal access issues. And, you know, the city residents are largely separated from the coastal access points in this area by Broadway. And they have to cross Broadway to access these areas and then walk or bike along Broadway. And we have heard from a number of people who drive to the waterfront trail because they don't feel it's safe. And so this is just adding to the traffic problems on South Broadway, people driving across Broadway and down Broadway to get to the trail because it's unsafe for them and their children to be biking or walking in that area. This sidewalk area is directly in between Vigo Street and Henderson Center, which is a major arterial and class 2 bike lane, which connects a major residential area to Broadway and to those coastal access points. And, you know, as we know, the city and Caltrans have been talking about the public safety emergency that exists on South Broadway for decades. And we're starting to make a little bit of headway here, but we really need to take every opportunity we can get to improve bike and pedestrian safety here, just as you would on any other street outside the coastal zone. So we strongly urge you to incorporate Caltrans recommendations that would make it safer for bikes and pedestrians in that section. Thank you.
Thank you. Other members of the public who are present? Yes, sir. Come on up. Or ma'am.
My name is Midge Catching, and I'm not representing anybody. I'm just a citizen of Eureka. And I have been listening to you talk about wanting to improve the safety of Broadway. And part of the problem with that section of Broadway, it would just be part of the problem, is the fact that we have a great many drive-through businesses there with the curb cuts that are involved in that, which means that there's more and more interaction between pedestrians and bicyclists, some of them kids with their training wheels, and the cars that are coming in and out of drive-throughs. This may seem not the meeting to bring this up, but there should be some discussion here about whether we should be allowing more drive-throughs, since there are so many there already. I don't know how many of you visit San Luis Obispo, but downtown San Luis Obispo has no drive-throughs of any sort, no ATMs, no drive-through restaurants, nothing. And it's a remarkably pleasant place to walk and drive. Thanks.
You're welcome. Anyone else online wishing to speak? Seeing none, I turn it back to commissioners for additional follow-on questions for staff. Or comments, yeah.
I'll start. I have a question, Mr. McCulloch. Will you come up and answer a question for me? Because I visited the site today, and you might be able to help me. So I noticed that your sign was gone.
Yes.
And in looking at the right-of-way, it was hard for me to tell if your sign was formerly located on your property or within the Highway 101 right-of-way, but it seemed to me that it was on your property.
It was on my property, yes.
Yeah. So why was it dismantled? Was it during the sidewalk construction that was recent?
Yes. Some time ago, maybe a year or so ago, I was down in the store one day, and they had two engineers out there from Caltrans making their graffitis on the ground, and asked them all, and they pull out their maps. And they say, "Oh no, your sign's within the green." I said, "Great, thank you," because I'd heard about this some time ago coming up. And then a week or so later, they're out there telling me that the sign's gonna have to come down. It's a few inches, not one pole, so they had to cut that one down, tear the whole sign down for that purpose. The thing is, what really brings the whole thing around now at this point with this project going in, if he's got this big huge building next to where my sign would have been, I would have to make it that much higher yet.
Right. So it's negligibly encroaching into the 101 right of way, like by inches is what.
Yeah.
Okay. And I guess the only other question I had is just with regard to you talked about the berm and how it was cut to allow drainage to pass through. Prior to that, it didn't, and I'm sure that was installed as a way to insulate your parking from that parcel and not have people driving through.
Correct.
Right? So was there a time when was the berm installed, as far as you know?
It was installed when the restaurant was originally built there. It used to be Ron's Roadhouse. And that was probably 73, 4.
Okay. So up until that point, up until the 96 event, it was kind of, it kept water from going onto the adjacent property.
Right.
And I guess the only other question I had was, were you ever approached, and I know this is probably, anyways, were you ever approached by the applicant or the owner about trying to develop shared access, or, thinking about ways that there could be a different configuration of driveways in that area?
I believe he did one time, yes. I can't recall seemed like something like that, yes.
Yeah. I mean, we're a little downstream of that, but it just seems like there's an opportunity to kind of solve some common issues if you collaborate on shared access or
I recall
circulation.
him wanting to do something on the back part of the property there.
Right. Okay, well, those are all my questions for right now. Thanks for your information.
Thank you.
I don't have more questions for staff at this time.
I guess I do have some.
Okay, let's continue then.
Let me, I should disclose this ex parte. I did reach out to Caltrans. I wanted to report on what I got, and I apologize to staff because this came to me late in the day. I called them earlier. Jesse Robertson is the member of Caltrans who commented on this project. And I have a good working relationship with Jesse in my job at the county, so I reached out to him. We talked about it, and what's a little troubling about this project is that the recent sidewalk improvements that are along the frontage of the project parcel were done by Caltrans within their right-of-way in the last few years, but they weren't done to the full 10 feet. They were done to 6 feet. Most likely because of the utilities and, because it met the bare minimums of ADA. It was ADA-driven improvements. And so on the one hand, I kind of wonder, why didn't you just get it right the first time? But on the other hand, it is the public's money, and, they achieved their goal. Now they're commenting on a single project and saying, we would like to see it expanded. Now that interferes with, it creates new wrinkles to smooth out, but it is relevant. And they're also saying we would like to see you narrow the width of the encroachment because it creates hazards and invites more traffic than should be directed. And I think both of those are compelling. The encroachment, in particular, the driveway, is problematic because it is outside technically the owner or the applicant's control to have someone on the neighboring parcel skinny up their driveway. But technically, it seems to me from what I paced out, the driveway is wider than the easement. And I'd like to know more, and I think Kristen could speak to this, about the improvement of in and out, because I wasn't on the commission when that, and I don't know if it even appeared before the commission, but it's in the coastal zone, so there was an action. If that was built with that expectation that it would be bigger than the 25-foot easement that existed, I'd like to know about that. And then the other part is that I spoke with a woman who was, at In-N-Out, they have the people that kind of shepherd the cars through and I said, how many people drive through the driveway or drive through and then come back out through that driveway instead of going to Vigo Street? And she said, oh, a lot of people do because they don't want to get queued at the light. They can just have an easier right turn. And it wasn't a small amount. So she said there is a lot of traffic. And so the build of that driveway, like I said, I paced it out 38 feet. That's pretty darn wide as best I can tell. That's at least 13 feet larger than the easement itself. So that is, to me, something we should be thinking about. And then in addition, I would like to hear more about the history of the approval of In-N-Out and if there was consideration of this, if there's any. I know that's kind of putting you on the spot, Kristen, but can you speak to whether these things were discussed and vetted at that time?
So Caltrans definitely had comments for the Carrington and In-N-Out project. That project did come before the Planning Commission for both the use permit and a coastal development permit and design review. Off the top of my head, I cannot remember exactly what the driveway width was that was shown on In-N-Out and Carrington plans. But any turning movements, signage, striping, that kind of thing, that was done with Caltrans approval in that they didn't object to it. So In-N-Out and Carrington had a traffic study done. They had studies done about traffic flows. We had numerous meetings with Caltrans about the project, and what we've got out there now is what Caltrans was comfortable with, what the city was comfortable with, and what the property owners would agree to.
Well, I think it's putting you and Caitlin in a tough spot to speak to whether or not there would be some real problems with the circulation of the In-N-Out and Carrington properties if the width of the driveway were to be reduced. I don't know any of us who could answer that effectively. But it is a question that I would like to see some attention given to, and because as Principal Planner Getz mentioned, we approve the project tonight and apply a condition that can't be met. It is then suddenly back before us at some point in the future, and that's a real pain in the neck for an applicant. And I am not, unsympathetic to that, but I would like to have a full vetting of what the actual feasibility of things is before they appear. And I think if we take the two matters up separately, well, there's really three, because we've heard from the McCullochs about their drainage concerns and having a building that's going to not accommodate flow through off their property, that's going to receive the flow and not have a place. That'll have to be addressed, but we don't know exactly at this point how that's being addressed. But the other parts are the two discrete improvements that can be made as part of this approval related to the driveway and the width of the sidewalk. And I would like to see more information about the feasibility and like a pro forma on the cost, for instance, of the sidewalk. If we just forget the driveway for a second, how much of an investment does it involve to expand the sidewalk width out to, accommodate a larger width? Seems like it's consistent with the city's plan for the sidewalk. It was maybe, and I think Mr. Fisk is right to say just because we missed it in prior development decisions doesn't make it any less valid to be thinking about it at this point. I'm also sympathetic to the fact that policy is the right place to handle these things, not on an ad hoc basis, but this is a coastal development permit, and it is asking to expand the footprint of the building, and not insignificantly, like by a third from what I calculated. So it is relevant. It is germane. It's fair to ask that question. And I would say, as a sort of just to show where I'm at, even if we weren't to require the sidewalk, I would be hesitant to approve the building footprint, even though it's allowed under the zoning setbacks for this zone, because it will frustrate the ability to ever build out those improvements in the future should someone else like Caltrans initiate it. You got a building that will not allow any give at that point because it's gone to the zero line. So that alone to me is a little bit troubling, because even if we say we don't have enough to be able to, at an ad hoc basis, apply this, we need to get the more comprehensive vision in place before we implement it. I do think it's going to be problematic having this development footprint that we're contemplating tonight. So those are the things that I think I would like to hear from the other commissioners and see where we line up on some of that. But I wanted to disclose that I did speak with Caltrans. I do have an email. I don't think it's fair to staff for me to just verbally. I'd like to forward it to them and give them an opportunity to respond, but I received it late today, and so I'm just giving you the summary.
Thank you, Commissioner Lazar, for your transparency and also for your ideas. I also, in listening to, reading both of the appeals and hearing the project from planner Castellano, it seems to me that there's been Caltrans has stayed in their lane, the city has stayed in their lane, the applicant has stayed in their lane, and we've lost some collaboration potential that might yield something a little bit better, and it seems to be minor things that aren't big cost elements compared to the actual project of the Norse commercial remodel and addition. So without a lot of strain to the applicant, I think there's some opportunities here to improve safety, certainly, and even potentially to improve drainage. And I'd like to hear what those ideas, might be. And I hate to be draconian and send it back because it's something that has been approved in the past. But I think there's merit to these appeals.
So I don't think any of the appellants or people who've spoken have gotten it wrong here, but I do feel like not only have people stayed in their lanes and maybe there was the opportunity for some collaboration, but like everybody, in my mind, the applicant is within the rules that exist, and we're not the legislature, we're the court. We're supposed to apply the rules that are on the books. And I do think it's relevant that the neighboring parcels didn't have to do this, and that the sidewalk is in good condition and recently put in. So, I find myself not disagreeing with the appellants, but really feeling for the applicant that, they've been sitting around for 2 months now. We're saying we want some more to make you, probably another month or two. I guess I think the one thing that is compelling in this is that zero setback, and that does dial things in for the life of that building. But I still net out at the place where I think the applicant has done what they're required to do. I would encourage them to be good neighbors, to really take that storm management, water management process seriously, to try to deal for the 50-year event as opposed to just the every other year rainstorm. But I sympathize with the applicant, and I really would like to see their project be able to move.
Well, thank you. I guess I would like to ask Planner Castellano to put the motion back up for us to have a look at it, and are commissioners ready to move forward with a vote?
I guess I would just I'll just respond to, because I do share your concerns, Commissioner Grant. I want to be clear. I feel like we're in a tough spot because policy hasn't caught up yet. I would push back on, we saw a lot of language in the staff report to say it's not appropriate to kind of be ad hoc on this stuff, but that is the point of discretionary permits. It is, you cannot at a regulatory level get everything fleshed out. There is always going to be a point where decision-making bodies have to say, well, there's something that's not really well covered under the code, and we have to address it, and we have to make sure we're governed by planning law to say you can't ask for the moon if someone's, not it's not proportional to what they're requesting as far as their entitlement. And that's where, to me, I'm always thinking in those terms. Like, they want to dramatically expand their footprint, but not that much, really. It's pretty small potato project. So how much is warranted as far as proportionally to their gain for what we're asking? Like, it tempers that, but it's always fair game, in my opinion, to get into things that are not written as policy, but can always be plumbed back to the findings we have to make, which involve public health and safety at its core. And we certainly have heard testimony, and we know that the Broadway corridor is not a safe environment, and there are ways that it can be improved. So it is incumbent on us to entertain reasonable ways to do that in the course of our charge here. So that's the only place where I'm coming from. But I agree that it's unfair to an applicant to continue to push things off, and especially when there's not a degree of certainty, and we really are doing that. So I would like to get to a degree of certainty. I just don't know exactly what the right route is there, if that makes sense.
Planner Castellano, can you bring up the motion?
Yes, bringing it up now. Thank you. Do you see it?
Yes, I do.
Okay, great.
Okay, I guess we're going to learn through application of a motion. So I move the Planning Commission adopt a resolution to sustain the Development Services Director's conditional approval of the coastal development permit at 2710 Broadway.
At least for purposes of discussion, I'll second the motion.
Okay, let's maybe do a roll call on this vote.
Yep.
Please.
Commissioner Lazar,
No.
Commissioner Kraft,
Yes.
Commissioner Benson.
No.
Thank you. Motion denied.
Okay, we are moving on then to, is there additional conversation here?
Because the motion failed, we have not yet made a final action on this, but
Yeah.
we have to decide what our next move is. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Let's hear from commissioners on what next moves might be.
I have a hard time thinking how we can condition this project tonight so that we're assured that these issues are addressed. If there was a way, I'm certainly open to hearing it. And by saying condition, I mean building into our approval things that will require visiting the things that we don't currently feel comfortable about, and having a way of those being addressed subsequent to our action and required as part of our approval. And if you feel like you can frame language of a condition or something that we can include with our approval, then we would amend the motion to say, subject to the conditions applied by the commission, X, Y, and Z. That is one way of making a decision tonight and putting it in the applicant and staff's court to implement those conditions and meet the intention of them. What do you guys think about that?
I tend to agree with where you started. That's a very tall motion to craft. So I guess what I think would be helpful to the applicant and to staff would be, what are the most important of the things that are your or our concerns, and some direction on where to go with that. I don't know where I would start on working on a driveway on somebody else's property, but I am kind of naive about this stuff, so I'm not going to claim to understand that. Seems like low-hanging fruit. that might be less objectionable to an adjoining property owner might be the signage and striping kinds of things. Maybe some more specificity on what has to be in the water management program, whether that's a 10-year flood potential or something like that. I mean, I'm spitballing here and not doing a very good job of it. But.
Well, I would offer let's just try to carve it into 3 chunks. So we'll say stormwater related to the neighboring property that comes through this parcel that largely is from the road right of way. That could be handled through language of some sort that says that before any building permits are issued, the stormwater plan will need to address the flow of stormwater from the neighboring property and making sure that development has a mechanism for accommodating it, even if it's just passing through or under the building or whatever it might be. But that it doesn't have to be engineered tonight or whatever night we act on it, but it has to be addressed before we issue a building permit, and we'll leave that to staff and the applicant to solve, essentially. And we can make those findings that it's relevant, it's reasonable, should be, and it's really, frankly, in their interest, in my opinion, to not have water running into the side of your building. So that's one chunk. But then the 2 others that are related to Caltrans comments. One thing that I didn't mention is in the letter or in the email I received from Mr. Robertson today, he made it clear that, and if Planner Castellano can put up the site plan for a minute.
Sharing it right now. Sorry, thank you. Some stuff out of the way.
So in the email I got, which I'll send to staff after our meeting tonight, it says, please note that should the city not approve our request for wider sidewalks, the area between the back of the sidewalk and the Caltrans right-of-way limits cannot be used to accommodate private facilities or private improvements. And then he lists any LID or drainage swales will need to be located on private property. Any landscaping within state right-of-way will need to be included within the city's maintenance agreement and installed under an encroachment permit. Any objects placed in the state right-of-way will require an encroachment permit. And if the additional space is needed to accommodate appurtenant facilities, including drainage facilities, the applicant may need to reduce the footprint of the proposed building. So they're not necessarily going to accept that green stuff that we see in the right-of-way. That's not it's not a foregone conclusion from my read. So I think the applicant would be wise to take note of that, because it is maybe or maybe not essential to their LID plan, their stormwater management plan. I suspect it is. And so we have to make the findings that it complies with all of the requirements, including stormwater management. And if that area that's not currently been vetted or at least approved by Caltrans for work within the highway right-of-way won't work, then we need to have a proposal that will. So I think that's something we can at least task staff and the applicant in addressing. And I'd be interested to hear from the applicant if they want to, I don't know if you'd be interested, Chair, but just to comment on sort of, because they did fly a different plan than what we have in front of us as far as certain features of the building. And I'd be interested in whether or not that's something that, would work with this. So yeah, so that's just something that I didn't mention earlier. I want to make sure is out there, is that the proposals within the right of way might not be supported by Caltrans, because they rely on the right of way. They're not on the property.
Did I miss the third leg of your stool there?
Okay, so talked about a strategy for stormwater to me is something that gives the staff and the applicant ability to solve the runoff from the neighboring property, and then with respect to the sidewalk improvements, it does seem to me to be feasible. But I'd be interested in a pro forma, essentially, of how much of a cost would it represent to move the retaining wall by 3 or 4 feet, to relocate utilities. I saw a cable cover for a cable and a cover for electrical, but having something that indicates that would be helpful for me to decide whether it's really reasonable to ask the applicant in the context of this type of a project for that investment. I mean, that to me would be helpful, but we don't have that. We just have a kind of dismissal of it. And then with respect to the driveway, something conclusive, like for instance, when cell towers are proposed and somebody says there's another site that you could put this tower and it would have been a way better site. Well, a good proponent of a cell tower would say, here's my letter from the guy. I tried to talk to him and they said, no way, Jose. And they would give us that. You know, it'd be nice to not have that as something in writing from the Carringtons and the In and Out folks saying we're not interested in entertaining any reduction of that right of way. And lastly, I think for that is an analysis of, is it not even on the table because we need that for the function of In and Out and the other commercial development. Like that would be a problem that would, by narrowing that driveway and reducing the number of places where people can get out from that complex, would create traffic problems that were inconsistent with the prior approval. I'd like to know about that. I think those would be the things that would help me settle my mind on these points. But I'm open to, does that make sense as far as like discrete tasks for staff and the applicant?
It does. Well, way better than I was doing.
So we have to come up with a recommendation then. I don't see us recrafting this resolution with this level of complexity, 3 additional points. I think I would like to send it back to staff. They're good at what they do. They know the applicants and the neighboring folk well, and we've had them here tonight, and see what in the short term could be done to get more information to us that would help us move this project forward.
So I think we would make a motion to continue it unless we want to hear from the applicant on anything, because the applicant can insist on, the applicant could insist on us making a decision tonight, you know, to deny the project if we can't reach agreement, you know, and then they can go on to the city council to have this discussion. So we probably want to give them that chance, and if they feel like they are willing to try to tackle some of the things that we've been talking about, then we can craft a motion to continue it with direction to staff, I think. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. But haven't we done that already tonight with our vote?
Well, we've indicated we can't approve it yet in its current form, but we haven't indicated whether, but I don't know that we've heard from the applicant as to whether they would insist on a decision tonight. And I think that would be helpful, even if that is denial because of the lack of consensus, given our quorum.
Is the applicant available to make comment on that or willing to make comment on that at this time?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, I'm not the applicant, but I am the agent on the development. I don't think the applicant's even on the meeting, but I know they are willing to help the process by complying with neighboring needs. The Caltrans situation is very confusing to me because I'm aware of the project that they've been doing that started south of the mall and ended north to West 15th Street. There's a big sidewalk improvement for public safety approved by someone at some point, and they've been working on that process, and that's why there is a new sidewalk. So if it wasn't safe, I don't know why it even started. But also on that site plan, the point that Steve brought up about Caltrans maybe not approving it or the city not approving it, the LID features, the planters in the front of the property. It actually says on that site plan to be designed by Caltrans, because back in 2019, when we started this project, we've been through this coastal and design review process for over a year now. It's been way longer than 2 months. I was in correspondence. I had correspondence with Caltrans, and they thought I was going to build the building before they built the sidewalk. and the retaining wall would have been part of the building, and the sidewalk would have gone up to it. But we've been stuck in this process for so long. They actually built the sidewalk first and had to build the retaining wall and the railing. They liked the idea of the building being the retaining wall and being able to extend the sidewalk and have planters in front of the building. We wouldn't have any kind of railing system. But now we're kind of stuck with the conditions that we have. Well, maybe not stuck. Maybe we can still expand the sidewalk, but we are showing the conditions we have now. The sidewalk is the way it is, and we're kind of developing around it. The water drainage system, I'd be concerned about if I was the owner. And we do have, it's not, fully detailed yet because we're in that design process of not trying to dump so much money into the thing until we can actually get going. But there will be kind of a zern drain system embedded into the wall cavity from the roof. And it would plug into like a French drain system that goes into that back 9-foot part of the property, east or west of the building, into like a water basin that hasn't been calculated yet for a 50-year storm, but we would be kind of reflecting how deep and how wide that would have to be to catch as much water as possible, with a drain outlet with an overflow that would kind of seep out slowly once it was full. Again, it's not fully designed because there's a lot of time and money that goes into it, but I'm more than willing to say that I think that would be a part of the plan. The owner would try to address that water issue, because I'm sure they would not appreciate it either. But besides the water and the sidewalk, what was the other concerns that maybe you wanted me to speak about?
Yeah, the driveway and signage were other issues we've spoken to this evening.
Okay. The driveway, when I look at the development plan for Carrington Company and In-N-Out, if you look at it, the whole thing, it's, the only two exits are to that street north of the property and then the one that we're discussing now. And the one north of it is constantly impacted by In-N-Out's drive-through. So I would imagine any kind of shipping trucks or, bigger vehicles that come to the property for supplies wouldn't be using that exit because it would constantly be jammed. It looks like from aerial view that it would just be an important exit to have widen. And maybe that's why they made it that way. But I do agree on the signage and only having, it actually shows on that development plan as well that you're only supposed to do right turns and come in it from the north. So egress from north, or ingress from north and egress from to the right, south. So it shows that on their site plan, on their development plan, but I haven't looked recently, but I don't think there's any arrows painted or any signage installed. And I definitely wouldn't be opposed to that. I think that's pretty important for safety, but I don't know whose, priority or whose responsibility it would be. But if we had a say in it, I would say we would probably be for it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take a stab at what I heard is that the agent for the applicant doesn't believe that the applicant would be opposed to trying to iron out some of this stuff.
That's what I heard too.
Okay. So I think then it's a matter of just providing some direction to staff. So I'm just going to say, we talked about this at length. I'm going to make a motion that we continue this, unless Kristen or Caitlin want to say to a date certain. I'll just leave it to a date uncertain and let you guys decide once you've got that stuff settled. Or would you like us to set it for our next meeting?
I would appreciate for the next meeting, please.
Okay. So that's the May, what's the May meeting? I'll just say to our regularly scheduled May meeting, and with direction to staff to provide more information for the commission on the three matters we discussed, which are the driveway, the sidewalk widening, and the drainage. And I think the drainage is probably going to get just a condition, maybe with some language. But on the two other matters,
Sure, go ahead.
yeah, it's signage with respect to not the business, but the actual driveway itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So those three elements, and with respect to the sidewalk widening, I'd like to see a financial analysis of the cost of implementing the 10-foot sidewalk concept in terms of costs. I'd like to see something. Does that sound reasonable? As far as anything else that we should?
That sounds reasonable to me. I would second that motion.
Mr. Vice Chair, just so I'm clear, we want the applicant to provide information for the Planning Commission to review drainage from a Caltrans facility onto an adjoining property that's going to come onto their property. Correct?
I would say drainage that's from the neighboring property. We don't know. It could be drainage from the parking lot. It could be drainage from Highway 101, but it's going to be from the property to the south, essentially, that currently enters the property.
I think what I'm hoping to hear from staff and the applicant is some stormwater flow that either percolates or conveys water through the site without it puddling or bonding.
Respectfully,
Mm-hmm.
why is it the property owner's responsibility to take care of stormwater that's coming from somebody else's property is my question.
Because it's an existing condition of the site that has never been adequately dealt with.
It would be, just to kind of flip it a little bit, we could say you have to go and get Mr. Fish to fix the stormwater so it doesn't come onto your property. They wouldn't have any control over that because it's adjacent landowners' land, just like the driveway issue. But they can at least plan for what they already receive and accommodate that in the building design. That's essentially what I think the discussion is hovered around. Is let's not pretend that runoff won't be joining the site, and putting a building up without planning for that could be problematic. But we don't need all the calculations. I want to be clear. I'm not saying that we have full engineering calculations. It could really just be an applicant agreed to condition that says that will be accounted for in the stormwater plan. Drainage from the adjacent parcel to the south, as far as I'm concerned. I don't know if the other commissioners are in agreement or not.
I concur.
Yeah, so that's all.
too.
I don't really think there will be anything other than a revised condition language on that one.
So is it possible to add that condition to the director's condition number 6?
Will Caitlin pull that up and we can maybe settle that right now?
Apologies, I did not have the staff report pulled up, but I'll pull it up real quick. Pulling it up now. Oh, hopefully it's the right condition, actually. Okay, no, I pulled up the wrong resolution, sorry. Let's just get to staff report.
It's the one that says post-construction stormwater.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it just took me a while to pull it up. Whenever you're in a hurry, things slow down. Sharing screen now.
I mean, I don't want to wordsmith it in front of us, right? I mean, this is somewhat boilerplate as far as pointing to the LID and small project language of the countywide stormwater plans, the MS4. But essentially, it would be that the stormwater control plan, will account for drainage from neighboring properties to the south in the design of the drainage facilities, and ensure conveyance of stormwater associated with drainage from that direction. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, I don't see anything in 6 that's really dealing with stormwater runoff in particular, which seems to be one of the issues.
Okay.
And then you wanted estimates of the cost to widen the sidewalk. As I mentioned before, sometimes there are sidewalk right-of-way areas that are 12 feet wide, but the concrete sidewalk is only 6 feet wide. I don't know whether that's the case here, that the right-of-way is 10 feet and that the concrete is only 6. The concrete is 6 to the north of it. The concrete is 6 to the south of it. Is it possible that you could apply a condition that talks about if the city's policy indicates that it's supposed to be a 10-foot wide concrete sidewalk as opposed to just the right-of-way area, that we then provide you the information. If our regulations call for it only being a 6, which is what it is now, we can just go ahead and proceed.
Yeah, I can add some clarification to that there is in our Eureka Municipal Code, section 98.32 talks about required sidewalks, and it does not specify in this specific area that it needs to be widened to the full sidewalk amount area, and that it says that the width shall match the width of existing sidewalks within the same block. So really, as you said before, it is kind of a larger policy discussion where if you want all sidewalks widened to the maximum sidewalk area, it should be administered, citywide. And right now, the only area in the city that does require it to go to the full amount of the sidewalk area, I believe, is in the downtown area, close to up there.
Sorry, through the chair. This is why I called you this afternoon, Kristen, to make sure that we had a clear understanding. So I knew this was going to come up. And so what I heard you saying earlier, maybe I misinterpreted, was that the planned build out for this area was 10 feet. Just it's not within the control of the city because it's within the city, within the Caltrans right-of-way. Why don't you clarify?
So what I was talking about before and now with the 10-foot right-of-way area is that's an area that's designated alongside the drive lanes on the street. That sidewalk right-of-way area is varying widths throughout the town from usually 4 feet to 12 feet, 12 feet being the most common. This one happens to be 10. But as I indicated before, just because the sidewalk right-of-way is a certain width doesn't mean that the concrete part of the sidewalk is that same width. There are...
that's not my question. The concrete part of the sidewalk is 6 feet. I think we understand that right now. That's on the ground. I was there today. I met, But what I understood you to say is that the 10 feet, please explain what the 10 feet is. We have what's there, but what does 10 feet represent?
That's the sidewalk easement. It's
But
the area.
Easement would be within Highway 101 right of way. So there's no easement, right?
And that's where we're running into the issues between city's regulations and Caltrans regulations.
What the easement in a city road instead of a state right of way? Is that what you're talking about? Because I'm not sure what you mean when you say the easement.
So the sidewalk right of way easement, the area along the side of the road where the sidewalk would be located. There's a width of that easement that is set based on where you are in town, and I'm not sure exactly what the parameters are. For example, outside City Hall here, on the 6th Street side, I think those sidewalks are probably 6 feet wide. It's entirely possible that the sidewalk right-of-way, the easement area for the sidewalk, is 10 feet.
Right, but that's a city right of
12.
way where the city controls easements, and it's not at all subject to any other jurisdiction's authority. So all the roads within city limits are publicly maintained and held by the city of Eureka, correct? Right, the rights of way, exclusive of the private land. So in this case, we have a right of way that's the Caltrans right of way.
Mm-hmm.
Probably isn't an easement to the city, it would be my guess, for sidewalk improvements. But Caltrans is saying we'd like to see 10 feet in the Caltrans right of way. And by my estimation, the plot plan calls out from the current back, or the, I don't know if you call it the back or the front of the sidewalk, the curb is 12 feet 8 inches according to the Cleek plan that we have in front of us. So there's clearly enough width within the Caltrans right of way to accommodate 10 feet. It's just not currently proposed or supported by the staff recommendation. So that's the 10-foot question is, what does it cost when you use Caltrans right of way to build a 10-foot sidewalk versus the 6-foot one that's currently there? And that will probably involve moving some things and also building a retaining wall would be my guess.
Commissioner Lazar, I appreciate your thoroughness in looking at both Caltrans and city rights of way and standard, sidewalk widths. I personally am willing to yield to the existing sidewalk and the consistency that it holds with other sidewalks, more in keeping with the city's regulations more than what Caltrans' ultimate desire. I'm a little more concerned about signage, in terms of the issues. Stormwater and signage rise to the top for me on this one.
As far as the driveway goes, is it possible that the commission would consider making a condition that says if the adjoining property owners are willing to make those changes, that the project property owner is required to do so? And if they're not, then there is no condition.
So in essence, we're making it voluntary? Did I understand that correctly?
No, that's not what I was trying to go for. Mm-hmm. What I was trying to say was the property owner would approach the adjoining property owners that have control over the driveway and ask them if they would be willing to allow the property owner to make those changes to the driveway. If they say no, then the project property owner is good to go anyway. If they say yes, then the project property owner is on the hook for doing those changes.
Okay.
I guess I would just offer there's two parts to this. One is it might be a nightmare to skinny that up. And if that's the case, let's find out now and move on with our lives, because we shouldn't skinny it up because it'll exacerbate circulation on the neighboring developments that use that. As I was told by the In-N-Out lady, it's clearly used currently by people leaving. So if that's not even negotiable because the circulation was dependent on that being a certain width and built in that, we don't know, but I'd like to get that settled. If it is negotiable, then the next question becomes, would the property owners consent to those skinning up of it, signage, etc.? And I'd like to get to the bottom of that before we take action and not make this something that's kind of an unknown one. But if we can't, I'm comfortable with what you're talking about, Kristen. It's just, I think we have enough time that conversation could be held in a more robust way.
I'm just concerned because, as the gentleman who spoke indicated, they've been working on this project since 2019. So, while one more month may not be a project breaker, if there's a way that we can resolve it this evening, I would encourage you to consider doing so.
Well, I'm concerned, honestly, about the circulation period. I don't know that we know that we can even skinny it up. It might not be a good idea. And we don't have Public Works here, and we don't have anybody who could speak to the technical requirements for the circulation that was built into the In-N-Out and Carrington property, and I don't feel comfortable even asking for that really at this point, other than I'd like to see it if it's possible. Does that make sense? Because I think that could be a real issue.
What I'm seeing is that even if we tried to create a proposal tonight, that would be, it might not get passed, but with enough of a majority to move forward. So I think we're it's an assumption, but I think we're kind of stuck in sending this back to staff. at this point. I greatly appreciate you trying to move things forward. Really, honestly, and we normally are able to do that, but I think this is worth a month's at maximum pause. Does staff feel that you have enough direction from us to move forward?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Steve Lazar made it, and Commissioner Benson.
There are no more actions to take on this, right?
We didn't vote on the motion.
Oh, sorry, we have to vote on
So
the
we,
motion.
we had a motion and a second, right? Okay.
Okay, that's what I was just saying.
Okay.
There's still a motion on the floor.
Okay, thank you.
You
Let's-
guys ready to vote?
I need to be reminded what the motion is.
To continue this discussion to the next.
Oh, that one. Yes, we're ready.
With the direction of staff to follow up on.
That's all in there, yep. Kristen takes much better notes on exactly how you word things than I do. So. Okay, Commissioner Lazar,
Yes.
Commissioner Kraft,
Yes.
Commissioner Benson.
Yes.
Thank you, motion carries.
Okay, we're moving to item. Sorry, did you want have something to say, Planner Castellano?
I was just saying thank you for your time.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, moving forward into business. No old business and new business is the 2021 General Plan Annual Progress Report. We're ready to receive that report.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have a presentation for you tonight.
Okay.
It was just that you have the ability to receive the report for the 2021 General Plan Annual Progress Report update. The council has already reviewed it. It's been sent to the State Department of Housing and Community Development, and they've acknowledged receipt of it.
Okay,
And I'm happy to answer any questions about it if there are any.
And that was made available in our package, yes?
Correct.
Yeah. I don't have any comments or questions on that. Do other commissioners wish to provide comment?
I just had one question. I saw a lot of TBDs on here, and I guess I was wondering, is that number going to shrink in the subsequent years? Is there a time frame for when we'll have dates for delivering on some of these? They weren't all that way. Some of them were discrete. But could you speak to that, Kristen, as far as whether there'll be some tightening up of forecasts beyond the TBD?
So as staff takes direction from the City Council, when they determine that we move forward on these projects and programs, then we will certainly do so.
Similarly, on the 2021 Housing Element Annual Progress Reports.
I actually have some graphs for you on this one.
Okay, good.
All right, so before you this evening is the 2021 Housing Element Annual Progress Report, also due to the State of California by April 1st, has already been submitted to them and was reviewed by Council at their second meeting in March. However, because housing is a very important project or process here, I wanted to bring forward to you some information about where we are as far as housing creation and where we would like to try and end up. So, state housing element law requires the city to accommodate a share of the total projected housing needs for Humboldt County. And that's for a planning period, which is also called a cycle. The share is the regional housing needs allocation. And it's important because state law mandates that each jurisdiction provide sufficient land to accommodate a variety of housing opportunities for all economic segments of the community. Compliance with the law is measured by the jurisdiction's ability to provide adequate land with adequate density and appropriate development standards to accommodate the RHNA. The Humboldt County Association of Governments, or HCOG, as the regional planning agency, is responsible for allocating the RHNA to individual jurisdictions in the region. For the current Housing Element 6 cycle, which covers 2019 to 2027, The jurisdictions within Humboldt County have been allocated a total of 3,392 dwelling units. The total RHNA allocation for the county is distributed across the 4 housing income levels, which include very low, low, moderate, and above moderate income. HCOG then assigns the RHNA to each incorporated city and the unincorporated portion of the county. This graph shows the percent of the total RHNA allocated to each jurisdiction, with Eureka highlighted there in gray. And the city has been allocated a RHNA of 952 units, and those are divided into the 4 income levels as follows. 231 very low income units, 147 low income units, 172 moderate income units, and 402 above moderate income units. And this graph shows the City of Eureka's RHNA allocation in orange as compared to the overall countywide allocation in blue by income level. So Eureka's housing element divides sites available for development of housing into 2 categories. The first is housing development on non-site specific parcels, which means the parcels are not specifically identified in the housing element. And the second is site specific. These are sites that have been identified by parcel number in the housing element. If we assign the non-site specific targets for the entire period covered by the housing element to an income level, we need 32 very low, 60 low, 248 moderate, and 140 above moderate units for a total of 480 non-site specific units. The city also tracks and reports to the State Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, the total number of building permits approved each year for residential uses. A building permit is approved when plans have been submitted and reviewed for conformance with building, fire, and zoning codes and public works requirements. It's ready to go, but the building permit hasn't been issued yet. Issuance of residential building permits is the second thing that we track. And when a building permit is issued, it means fees have been paid and work can actually begin on the project. And lastly, we track and report when a certificate of occupancy is granted for a residence. A certificate of occupancy means all required inspections have been completed and passed, and owners or renters can start living in the residence. One thing to keep in mind as we review the information relating to the number of building permits. Except when we include prior years, the information shown in the report is only for the building permits that were approved, issued, or received a certificate of occupancy between January 1st and December 31st of 2021. So if someone applied for a permit in 2018 and it was approved a couple of months later, but they didn't pick it up until the first half of 2019, and then it took them a year and a half to finish the project and get a certificate of occupancy, that permit would show up in 3 different housing element annual progress reports. It would show up as approved in 2018, issued in 2019, and it would show up on the 2020 report, and we would report, it would not show up on the 2020 report, and we would report it as having received a certificate of occupancy in 2021. There may also be building permits that are completed in the same year, and that permit would then only show up in one housing element APR. So if we look at the building permits that were approved for 2021, we can see that an overall total of 68 dwelling units were approved this year, or last year. Pardon me. If we add in the totals for 2019 and 2020, an additional 49 units received building permit approval. And this means building permits for a total of 117 dwelling units have been approved since 2019. This graph shows the number of target dwelling units in blue with the number of building permits approved in orange for 2021. This graph again shows the number of target dwelling units in blue with the number of building permits approved between 2019 and 2021 in orange. Here are the building permits that were issued for 2021, again by income level, with 19 permits issued. And if we add in the totals from 2019 and 20, building permits for an additional 18 units were issued, with a total of 37 dwelling units receiving building permits since 2019. Here's a graph showing the target dwelling units in blue again, with the number of building permits issued in 2021 in orange. And here are the number of target dwelling units in blue, with the number of building permits issued from 2019 to 2021 in orange. And finally, here are the building permits that received certificates of compliance for 2021, again by income level, with 17 dwelling units approved for use. And if we add in the totals from 2019 and 20, an additional 92 units have received a certificate of occupancy during the current housing element. A total of 109 new dwelling units are now available for habitation during the current housing element. And here's the last graph showing the number of target dwelling units in blue, with the number of certificates of occupancy issued in orange for 2021. And here's those targets in blue again, with the number of certificates of occupancy issued between 2019 and 2021 in orange. As I mentioned before, the housing element divides sites between non-site specific and site specific, and each type has different ways that housing could be created. Housing development on non-site specific parcels could be created through construction of accessory dwelling units. The goal of the housing element is to create a total of 160 ADUs between 2019 and 2027 in 3 income levels. In 2021, we issued certificates of occupancy for 9 ADUs, and in 2019, we issued certificates for 15 ADUs, which gives us a total of 24 certificates of occupancy issued for ADUs since 2019. Another way to create housing on non-site specific parcels is to divide or convert existing space into dwelling units. This happened a lot in the 1970s when a lot of our Victorian homes were taken and converted into duplexes or fourplexes. So sorry, I'm a little off on my slides here for you. So there's been no conversions in previous years, and in 2021 we issued 9 certificates of occupancy for conversions of existing space to dwelling units. The third way to create housing on non-site specific locations is to subdivide using either a small lot or conservation subdivision. The goal is to develop 160 dwelling units in 2 income categories. And in 2021, the city approved small lot subdivisions that created a total of 9 parcels, with 7 of them being vacant. Although no new dwellings were proposed on any of the newly created lots before the end of 2021, I believe at least 3 of the sites will apply for development in 2022. There were no small lot subdivisions in 2019 or 20, so our total since 2019 remains at 9. And lastly, the other type of site that is available for housing development is site-specific. These are sites that have been identified, as I mentioned before, by parcel number in the housing element and are currently either vacant or non-vacant sites. These sites include the housing on publicly owned lots, but to date there's been no development on these sites as of yet. And since we need to change implementation program H34 to remove the Cooper Gulch and Sheriff's Woodlot sites and add in the new sites we've been working on for the last year, staff has submitted a draft update to HCD for the 60-day review. Based on comments from HCD, we still need to do further review and updating. And once we have resolved any comments HCD has, the update will come to the Planning Commission for recommendation, then to council for adoption, and finally to HCD for certification. We'll then be able to issue RFPs for development on the next set of site-specific locations. The last thing I want to share with you is an update on where we are with our overall RHNA. We have a goal of a minimum of 952 dwelling units, again spread over 4 income categories. For 2021, we issued certificates of occupancy for 19 dwelling units. In 2019, we issued certificates of occupancy for 92 dwelling units, which is a total of 111 new units. This means that there's only 841 dwelling units to go if we're actually going to create dwellings for our entire RHNA goal, which is not a requirement. So I'm happy to answer any questions that I can.
Thank you for that report. We learn a lot, or I personally learn a lot. Site-specific versus non-site specific, for example. I don't know whether this is a fair question to ask, but what do we mean by very low, low, moderate, and above moderate incomes? What does that mean for Eureka?
So those are a percentage of the area median income that's usually set by the census. Mm-hmm. Very low is 0 to 30%. Low income is 31 to 50%. Moderate income is 51 to 80%, and above moderate is 81 and over. And the area median income changes often, so I don't have those numbers in front of me right now as to what that means for the different income levels, but I can certainly get that information for you.
Yeah, it's okay. I can find that out, or I have an idea of that. I was just curious. Average time to go through the building permit process, and looking at the targets that you had, the total targets in blue bars. Do you feel like we're behind, or are we going as fast as we possibly can? Are there streamlining measures that could? Would you give us an A, B, or C, or a T for getting building permits through?
So in looking at the number of applications that were submitted in 2019, I think that one of the things that happened was that the building code was going to be updated in 2019. So we had a lot of people who submitted applications that maybe were not quite ready to move forward, or their plans were not complete, but they wanted to get them in under the wire so that they could be under the old building code. I think that's why we probably had an influx right at the beginning of 2019, because it certainly seems like only a small number of those have actually moved forward. Mm-hmm. Okay. It's always challenging trying to figure out how to best support development of housing on parcels by private property owners. Our zoning code, I think, has gone a long way towards reducing the regulations and the standards which they have to apply for. We've reduced the parking requirements, for example, increased bicycle parking requirements, allowed exemptions and reductions in parking requirements when they do actually apply. So, I'm sure there's always more that we could do. I think one of the challenges that we're facing, and one of the things that is in the housing element and the general plan, both, is to provide education to private property owners about, hey, this is your property. Do you know what you can do with it? Mm-hmm. Kind of thing. So we will be working on those things going forward. Right after the housing element was, right before the housing element was adopted by the city, our department actually went from having 10 people in it down to having 5. So a lot of the staff that were available to work on all of the programs and processes that we had dreamt of in the housing element going forward were no longer with us. So we're trying to recover staffing levels at this point in time to bring us back up to a level where we can really concentrate on these things, because they are important.
It sounds like getting things principally permitted based on tonight's performance of the Planning Commission, where we gently apply the brakes from time to time. seems like that's one thing too.
Definitely, that is would be happening under our update to the LCP, and we're hoping that that's going to be moving forward sooner rather than later.
Great. Thank you. Anything else from staff tonight?
I would just like to ask a question, Ms. Getz. What are the levers that the state has to implement this? What are the implications for the city if and when we miss targets?
So implications to the city for missing targets can mean that funding for projects is not available, or that the points that are awarded to determine who receives funding, they don't get as many points as they could if we were in compliance or hadn't missed a deadline, kind of thing. As I mentioned, we are proposing an update to the housing element, and we're actually increasing, at least in draft now, we are increasing the number of dwelling units that the city will be putting out for RFP. So we're going from the low 300s to the mid 300s. So hopefully that will be helpful. We're also looking at accommodating our RENA allocation through using vacant properties that are still existing in the city. So.
And we can't be alone in this. How do we look relative to other California cities?
So I was actually just reading something online before the meeting this afternoon that the state of California Housing and Community Development Department is looking at sending out letters to jurisdictions who have not complied with SB 9 yet, or have adopted ordinances that do not comply with SB 9 for one reason or another. I couldn't find the list to make sure that we're not on that list, but the city council did adopt in February the recommended text amendment that incorporated the SB 9 provisions into the zoning code, and it became effective on March 17th.
And I'm sorry, at a high level, what is that code? What is that?
Sorry, you weren't here then. So SB 9 is a law that became effective on January 1st of this year. And basically what it allows is to have up to 4 dwelling units on one single-family residential zone property.
Oh, so this is the duplex thing I was reading about today.
That thing, yes.
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
So that's one component of SB 9, is to allow what we're calling second single-family residences on R1 zone properties. So you could have a total of 4 units is the way that we would look at it. You could have 2 single-family residences. You could have a junior accessory dwelling unit in one of those, and you could have an attached or a detached accessory dwelling unit. The other component of SB 9 allows for subdivision of those lots into 2 different lots, provided it meets some requirements. We're referring to those as an urban lot split, and basically what it allows is ministerial review of a 2-parcel subdivision, which can then allow you to have those 4 units on one part of the parcel, subdivide off the other part of the parcel, and then build up to 3 more units on that one.
Okay. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Good question. Sorry to have moved it forward too fast, and that was important. Moving into reports and communications, I'd like to ask Commissioner Lazar just to give us a brief update on the cannabis ordinance and interactions with the city on that.
Yeah, I did have a question for Kristen. I just wanted, on the last item, I just didn't get a chance. It was just you mentioned that the targets that we have basically planned for through our zoning and land use densities aren't being hit, but that we're not required to hit them. Didn't I hear that during your presentation, that we issued this many permits, we could theoretically have had this many based on our densities, but it's not essential that we do that. How does that work? Because I think that's what Commissioner Kraft was kind of getting to too, but I wasn't exactly sure the difference.
So if I understand your question correctly, the city of Eureka is required to prove to the state of California that we have enough land that's zoned to be able to produce
The
950
number of units. that are
952
required.
dwelling units if somebody's willing to build them somewhere,
Right.
or combinations of people are willing to build those somewhere. However, there is no requirement for people to actually do that building. We just need to be able to show that there is space available and zoning available for them to do that. The extra component that the city of Eureka currently has in the housing element is that for 12 different sites that were identified in the housing element, the city of Eureka said, we're going to put out an RFP and request folks develop on these sites, and that they develop at least a minimum of X number of very low and low income units, and then as many additional units as they want to, as the zoning can allow going forward. So those are the properties that, for example, Link Housing was awarded the first 3 from the first RFP that we did. And because of issues with the parking lots that were identified and losing a couple of sites because they were constrained by financing that had been done in the past and are limited to only being parks and recreation and can't have housing on them, we needed to find some new sites to replace those. So we've gone through that process, and we have, I think it's 12 sites still that we're going to be proposing to HCD, but because we're able to provide our arena for the 952 on vacant sites, the sites where we're going to be doing the RFPs are not required for us to meet our arena target. Does that kind of
So
answer
just
your
to
question?
kind of take a stab at making sure I understand you, that's sort of above and beyond the bare minimum by city sponsoring development and RFPs to try to accelerate development of vacant land within the city, right? Okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
And again, this is all purely draft. It hasn't been to HCD, has not been to obviously you or the city council. So this is just the staff level draft.
Sure. One thing that I thought would be helpful maybe the next time we hear this would be equating the units to, especially in the case of like higher densities, to development that we see. You know, some of it didn't come before us, but like this building created 45 units. You know, I have a feeling I know where a lot of those units are, but I don't know for sure. And it'd be nice, at least in the higher density, I wouldn't want to see it on a single family home basis, but like where we were getting 20, 30, 40 units at a shot, it'd be nice to kind of have a summary of what those developments were within that fiscal period.
Okay.
Or that was all. Okay.
Annual progress report. Don't want to move ahead too fast. All right, we are then moving to reports and communications, and I would like to ask Commissioner Lazard. The commission had asked you to meet with cannabis planners, staff with the city, and I'm wondering how that went. So just a brief summary is fine.
And Commissioner Kraft was there, so he can correct me if I get anything wrong. We did have a meeting with the city manager, the program manager for cannabis, Riley Topolewski. We had the gentleman from code enforcement, or maybe not code enforcement, but maybe like the inspection arm of the department. I think maybe a member of law enforcement as well.
Captain Stevens was there, economic development, Swan Asbury.
Yeah, that's, I mean, a pretty good cross section.
Yeah.
And so we kind of went through the things that I'd brought up during the hearing. One of my biggest interests were trying to incentivize certain uses and making it more zones where they're allowed. And those uses were, I was trying to say, the cannabis support facilities, which was just a term to essentially bundle distribution, processing, testing, and I think there was one other. But essentially, one of the things that was learned after the meeting, too late, was that there was confusion at the staff level, because when I was speaking about my interest, I wasn't distinguishing between the the licensing provisions of the code and the land use provisions of the code. And I would say that in respect to the land use provisions dictate the zones where things are allowed. The licensing provisions dictate the type of license you hold when you pay your fees each year. I must admit, at the county level, we don't have a local license. We have taxation, but it's totally a separate exercise. So I think staff was misinterpreting that when I was saying I wanted to see groupings, they were already grouped everything under a general cannabis license type, which means you can just hold one license and do a variety of different activities, which reduces the cost to the operators within city limits. And that's a benefit. And right off the bat when we met, it was like, hey, I'm sorry if there was any misunderstanding. I don't want to see you break that up into 5 different licenses. That wasn't my intention. It was breaking out parts of that at a land use level so that we gave greater opportunity for the number of zones where we accommodated some of those types of uses. But what it became clear in the context of the discussion was I had spoken with the chief building official, and I'd also spoken with fire, with Bill Reynolds, and there was hesitancy to carve out the non-volatile extraction from the volatile and treat them separately. And the volatile extraction being extraction using CO2 or even ethanol, and also, but not flammable types of solvents. And what I got from speaking with them was, both at the meeting and prior to the meeting, was we don't think it's appropriate to treat them more lightly and allow them in zones beyond what we've already established. And so that was pretty clear. There wasn't a lot of support at the staff level and at the building level. The other thing we talked about was the infusion concept and trying to allow that as a cottage industry. We got some pushback there too. I'll ask Michael to see if I get this right. But basically, there was concern that, like, one, they thought that at a state level, you couldn't get a license to do it in a residence. I'm not convinced. I haven't seen anything that really convinces me. But my point during the meeting was, it doesn't mean we can't provide a pathway at the local level, because the licensing provisions have continued to evolve and will continue to evolve, frankly, if the will's there. So that was the one place where there was possibly some room for development. But I think that it from my takeaway from the meeting was there wasn't a lot of gains to be made by tinkering with the code beyond what we had in front of us. And that there wasn't support for the cottage industry concept, at least at the staff level. But if we as a body felt it was appropriate, we could, in our recommendation to the commission, to the council, say, we believe that it's worth investigating and including provisions for not extraction, but infusion. So taking oil and compounding it with something like a baked good or a soap or a tincture or something like that in a residence, that providing that pathway. So I think I'm overdue in providing some feedback to Riley, but I think that we can bring this back to us and we can decide at that meeting whether to include additional language in our resolution for the recommendation of the council as to whether or not we have support for that concept, and then let the council decide on whether to direct staff to do more work on that concept within the zone, within the land use part, not the licensing part. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So that was a lot, but what do you think, Michael? Did I get it right, or did I miss?
You did get it right from my memory. I too would like to see a path for the cottage industry parts of that. I probably said in our last meeting, and I said in that meeting that, if you go to Pop and Barclay's 4th Street location, it smells like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory in there. There's no weed smell at all. It just smells heavenly. And so that, what I get on an informal level from city staff as somebody who works in the cannabis industry is, look, be good neighbors, don't smell weird, follow the rules, pay your taxes, that kind of stuff. And I think all of that is doable. We're in this interesting pendulum thing with cannabis where certainly at the county level, we're seeing some swinging back and more conservatism. But I think that pendulum will continue to swing, and it's going to lose energy eventually. And we'll be at a place where this is, I hope and believe that this is no more controversial than 5 other industries that you can name. And I think we're in a place that very much supports cottage industry overall. I think it is a place where we should hope to go in the future. And so I'd like to, even if it's a light recommendation to the council from us, I'd like to see that part of it. I do know that there are good small businesses to be had in the home level in baked goods and gummies and that kind of thing if people want to. And so, my company won't go there. We seek to be at some greater scale, but I would love to see others have that path.
And Michael, would you agree? I think during our meeting we got confirmation from Mr. Gerving that cottage food permits are already allowed in residences, and
yes,
from his perspective, it didn't strike him as something that would be a huge departure from what we could entertain independent of cannabis.
I do think that the cannabis part it does and understandably still has some special rules. I also believe that a lot of this precedent was set under a council 5 years ago that was pretty clear in my mind to stay out of residential areas, but I'm not sure the current council would see it the same way. I certainly don't think they'd be offended by a recommendation from us.
So if that sounds good, I'll write an email after tonight's meeting to Riley saying let's bring it back for a vote, and we can tackle the matter of cottage industry and whether to include a recommendation.
And Senior Planner Topolewski had indicated he would bring it back at May.
Great, thank you. Good news.
What is Stephen's deadline for this email? Like, when does Riley need to have that to be, and when do you need to notice it for the next meeting? When does the planning department need to notice it?
Commissioner,
what I heard is it doesn't really matter. It's coming back in May, but.
The last that I heard from Senior Planner Tupolewski was it was coming back to the Planning Commission in May. If Commissioner Lazar would like to send an email encouraging that or supporting that, he's more than welcome to do that. Public hearing noticing will go out a minimum of 10 days before the May meeting, so sometime around the beginning of May, if not earlier.
All right. And I do appreciate everybody in the room providing this kind of remedial catch-up education for me on how this stuff works.
Yeah, me too. All right. Well, only thing I would like to report to staff is that the Form 700, I got a notice that it was filed successfully, so thank you for doing that. I hope other commissioners also received a similar email from the state. So I think does anyone else on the commission have any other reports? Okay. Let's adjourn for this evening. Thank you so much.